So if I just like randomly fall over or trip, it's because she's a menace. Welcome to my channel, Haylee Marie Vintage. Today we are honoring spooky season. You know, Spooky, my cat, she needs a whole season. She's sleeping very peacefully over here. I'm sure I'll wake her up and bother her at some point so she can appear in her video. But for spooky season, I have decided to undertake a big project. So some of you saw this fabric here in the video where I unboxed a whole bunch of stuff that Heather sent me from the dressmaking factory. And this is all a bunch of black and white gingham. I hinted in that video that it would be a part of my Halloween costume. I had a few people message me and guess, and one person so far has guessed correctly, and this here is for a black and white Dorothy. This would be Dorothy before she goes to Oz when she's still in black and white. As you guys know, sustainability is really important to me on my channel, and so I wanted to make a Halloween costume that I can wear for Halloween, but then I can wear for the rest of my life. That's a bit dramatic. So maybe not the rest of my life, but like years and years and years and years in my normal everyday wardrobe, and have a Dorothy costume I can just pull out like that. So that is what we're doing here. This is obviously a key material, this black and white gingham. It isn't cotton. It's not historically accurate, whatever that means for this video. So I guess not 1939, this is a polyester. But since I could buy it secondhand, and buying things secondhand are better from the environment. So before we talk about kind of diving into how I'm going to do this, let's first hop into some footage of the actual Dorothy dress. We have one of them in the museum here in Seattle, so I went down to the Mopop and took some footage. So I'm going to show you that footage now and kind of talk through how I'm doing the dress. So we are at the Mopop, as you can see here. This is the lovely dress that I was able to go and see. So what's really interesting about this dress is it's actually connected into one piece, which I decided to separate because then I'll get more uses out of them. But as you can see, there's a ton of bias binding here up along the top and then across the waist. And as we go further down, you will see there's also bias tape down at the bottom of the skirt. The other interesting thing I noticed as I was looking at this is there is no darts for any bust in this dress, which is super fun because I do have a bust, so we'll have to kind of figure that out. All right, so now that we are back from that footage, I hope you enjoyed. The Mopop is a really fun museum if you like pop culture. I personally am always forever behind on pop culture, which is great because the Mopop right now feels a little bit behind pop culture as well, so I actually get everything there and I'm not confused. However, we're gonna start here with the blouse. As I mentioned in the footage, the dress and the blouse are actually all one piece in Dorothy's costume. However, I'm gonna make them separates so they're more wearable, more useful. So I have some cotton lawn fabric. I usually use this for lining, but I'm gonna use this for the dress, this shirt in this case. So the biggest thing, well, there's a lot of things I'm gonna learn from this project. My goal is to wear a wig and possibly paint my whole entire body black and white, and I am going to learn a lot from all of that. But I'm also going to learn how to hack together patterns. These two are just the patterns I'm using for the top. We'll get into the patterns I'm using for the dress later. I'm gonna be really rigging that one and playing it by ear, but I do actually have patterns for these ones. Simplicity, I think 3917, this dress here. Let me shove it at your face. As you can see, there's some cute puffed sleeves here, and I'm gonna use these puffed sleeves for my costume. They're a little bit more puffed than Dorothy's, but I love a puffed sleeve, and I'm the one who's gonna wear this until the day I die, so I get to make those choices. And then I'm also gonna combine it with this shirt. This shirt I chose because the neckline is gathered, much like the one that Dorothy wears in the video. The other things I'm gonna have to adjust is both of these patterns, the bands are probably about like 1/4 of an inch thick, and I need them to be a full inch or like 3/4 of an inch thick, so I'm gonna have to just draft those from scratch. I am in classic form, not making a mock-up, so we're just gonna see. Cotton lawn's pretty cheap, so if I really screw it up, I have like 20 yards of it since I use it for lining all the time. Let's go ahead and jump into cutting the pattern. All right, here we are picking up Spooky's toys first thing, just because she's such a mess, and then I have already ironed all of my fabric and my pattern pieces, so we are just now cutting them out, laying them out, getting them all good to go. For these, like I said, this is a mix of patterns, which is why you are seeing a printed pattern and a non-printed pattern, and then I am going ahead and I am cutting any seam that I'm sewing together where I want a French seam with an extra 1/2 inch seam allowance. And then with that, that'll give me the ability to sew together and all that jazz. Now you can see the cozy sewing scene. Here is Spooky obviously napping, and I am working on, I started with the sleeves. I did these fully off camera pretty much, except for this little bit of sewing. I was just figuring out how to use a French seam, and I figured the sleeves were perfect for it because like it was so short that if I had to unpick anything, it wouldn't be a huge nightmare. But it is pouring rain, very moody and dark in my apartment today. So I hope you enjoy the mood lighting and the sleeping Spooky. This is the general mood of this whole video. As you can see, it's pouring out. I left my laundry out there on accident, but at this point I don't want to open my door and deal with it, so it will just sit out there. It dried eventually because it was technically covered, but yeah, it's pouring cats and dogs out there, and yeah, that is just the mood and theme of this video. We have sleeves. I did these off camera just because there's not anything super special about them, and I was trying out the French seam for the first time, which I do have in here. So now I'm going to show you, I guess, like how I learned to French seam. There's plenty of tutorials on YouTube that are going to do this better than I, but I did learn how to do it, and I'm pretty excited about it. These sleeves are looking good. They look like the ones from the movie. So it does kind of feel like this is not a lot to have with a full day of work in, but let's now jump into French seams. All right, for the French seam, I have started by pinning the wrong sides together, which feels really weird because usually you pin the right sides together to start out, but the wrong sides are all pinned together and ready to sew. And then here we have that seam all sewn up, and I am pressing it open from the inside. I guess you're supposed to do this and get it really, really well pressed, just so that way it is easier to make the French seam do what you want it to do. And then from there, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be trimming those inner seams down to, I think, like a 2/8 or 3/8 of an inch, and then I will be pressing those closed again, so like the bodice is laying completely like flat on the seam, and the seam is kind of squished and ready for the like next part of the French sewing. All super interesting, and just definitely had to like work my brain a little bit different to do this type of seam finish. And then I'm going ahead and I am sewing that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, I believe, so that way none of the edges of the cut seam show through. This is a super nice finish, and I'm really glad I learned how to do it in this project. This is the first project that I have ever bought a PDF pattern that you have to paste together yourself. It was challenging. I don't know that I honestly would buy them again since there's so many patterns available in my size. However, it was nice for the convenience of having it really quick and on hand, so I was definitely pretty happy about that. But I'm just kind of following their diagram and matching these up and taping them together and cutting them out. It was kind of a lot of work, and I definitely prefer just getting a pattern that is ready to go. It's also nice because since I use vintage patterns, usually they're like basically pre-cut out, which I love. However, because this is a PDF pattern, it means you guys can buy it, and I will link it down below. I didn't use it in its conventional manner, so like not probably that helpful, but it was a nice pattern, and I am excited to use specifically the bow side tie. I will also put a picture of the pattern in here so that way you can see what it looks like. But yeah, it's this really beautiful bodice, and I was just using the bodice, but I also really liked the wrap bow detail, and I plan on using that for sure. It's interesting. So while working on this project, I listened to the podcast called No Place Like Home, which is about like how somebody stole the ruby slippers from a small museum where Judy Garland grew up. It was really interesting listening to this podcast because they actually discussed how they actually had her completely like strapped down in the bodice of this dress because she was supposed to be 12 years old instead of 16. And that suddenly made the fact that her bodice had no darts in it make sense because they were strapping her down, and so they didn't need that shaping. That honestly sounds pretty uncomfortable. Listening to this podcast was a little bit depressing because I learned more about Judy Garland's life. So I thought that was really interesting to listen to, and I would definitely recommend listening to No Place Like Home to learn a little bit more about the Wizard of Oz and kind of actually just Hollywood memorabilia in general. It was a super interesting listen, and I enjoyed listening to it while working on this project. All right, and now I'm just cutting out the bodice. I'm cutting this again with the room to have French seams where the seams meet each other. Both this and the top I actually cut across a fold line just so I could have a back zip and a back closure like the costume from the movie does. So that is kind of why you see me laying something that clearly tells me to lay it on the fold, not on the folds. And then here I am going ahead and cutting things for bias. I needed a bunch of different sizes of bias tape here, and because all the details were cut on the bias, I needed side bias trim for the hem of the skirt, for the waistband, for the shoulder straps, and for border on across the top of the bodice. So I kind of had to mathematically figure all of that out. I don't feel like I checked in and showed you this at all. But I do have a done blouse. I do need to add the snaps or the hook and eye closure for the neck, but otherwise it is all done and it looks pretty close to the one in the movie. I'm actually pretty pleased with this. And then I also have the bodice made up. I used French seams for this. I didn't do any of it on camera because it's just a pretty basic bodice pattern. But basically what I want to do is I want to take this, I guess maybe we'll take it down on the front. But basically, in the movie, her bodice definitely doesn't go as high as this one goes. So I probably want to pin this way to like kind of make it a bit shorter. And then keep in mind that it's going to get a little bit taller again. Bias tape that I'm going to put here, that is in the opposite direction. So we'll probably do it about here and then I'll pin it. I don't know why, but standing up and doing this is like making me feel out of breath. And also Spooky is zooming in and out under my legs right now. And if I just like randomly fall over or trip, it's because she's a menace. All right, so I have this put down and then I'm gonna pin here on the bodice because I would like it to, hit pretty close to my natural waist. However, I do want it a little bit below that, just because I'm adding the like belt there. She has a waistband there. I'm just using basically a big single fold bias tape for that, which I'll show you when I get to construction. But basically now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna cut this part off and I'm gonna cut the bodice up to here, up to these marks, 1/2 inch below these marks, so that way it hits where I want. And then I am going to cut the skirt, which I haven't done yet, and I'm gonna choose the skirt measurement. And if you look at the dress, it's not actually that gathered. So I'm just gonna take the measurements from around here and double them. And that is how like puffy I'll have the skirt. I'm gonna double it specifically in the front. In the back, actually, I noticed that her skirt is much more gathered, so I'm gonna double it in the front and I'm gonna triple it in the back. So I'll next check in with you as I start to sew this to the skirt and get all the bias taped nonsense figured out. Here I am figuring out how to put on the bias tape. I did interface it because I decided I wanted to have some sturdiness there just because it is the top and this fabric kind of mushed down really easy, so I felt like having something at the top that would kind of stabilize it would be really good. And it helped like actually put in the crease in the bias fold because this is a polyester fabric. It didn't crease particularly well. So basically I just applied this like a big bias tape. This was I believe 4 inches wide because I wanted a 1 inch finish. This method always takes a good amount of ironing, so keep that in mind. However, ironing always makes sewing look better and you can't ignore or stop from having to do it anyway. And then here we are, I am doing that same French seam method again right here, where I'm pressing the seam open and then I am cutting it down to about 2/8 of an inch. And then I am pressing it over again and then sewing it. I wanted to make sure all the seams on this were really clean because this fabric is so prone to fraying. And then here I am pinning on the bias tape near the hem. I've already sewn down the hem with machine stitches because I knew I was going to just cover them with this bias tape. And then I used that mark that I sewed as my guiding line for where I needed to attach the bias tape, so that way I didn't have to like overmark or do anything like that. And then I am just pinning that all the way around the skirt, and I will go ahead and hand sew this down because I think it will look much nicer than if I top stitch. Any top stitch I do, whether it's white or black, is going to be really visible on this garment. I actually really enjoy hand stitching even though it really hurts my hands. I have no idea what stitch I'm really doing. I just kind of make it up to make them as invisible as possible. In this case, I was making sure every stitch that was seen on the other side of the fabric was going through one of the little black squares, so that way the thread wasn't visible because I was using black thread. And then of course, while sewing, as always, I got a little snuggly cat in my lap. She likes to sit in my lap while I hand sew, even though it's not my favorite because I have to maneuver like my scissors and pins and needle all around her in fabric. But she is cute and cuddly, so I can't complain too bad. And then here I am gathering the skirt down to the bodice to fit the bodice. This ended up being a little bit more gathered than I planned, but I think it turned out okay, and I do really like the result, so it's fine. but it's definitely a little bit more gathered and more full than the original costume from the movie. Or somehow in the movie, it feels like her skirt was fuller than mine, but they had less gathering, and I don't really know how that works. It was probably patterned a little bit differently than mine because mine are just straight up rectangles. Hers must have been more of kind of like an A-line, but I didn't see any seams to indicate that, so I don't totally know what's going on there. Alrighty, we've got all the details put in. It fits okay. I definitely wouldn't be like ready to wear this as a strapless piece. However, I do think it is shaping up pretty well. So now the last piece I have to do for this dress is the straps. I have gotten a measuring tape that is pinned down at the bottom of the dart on the back, and I am just gonna grab this measuring tape. I have a mirror right here. I'm just trying to make sure basically that I'm getting it flat. And then I'm going to bring it up here where I'm gonna pin a bit. First up here, let me find, where did I put my pins? Every time I pin that, then it puts too much tension on this one and it comes undone. But I'm gonna assume I need my strap to be 30 inches. I'm gonna actually err on the side of shorter because it'll hold the dress more in position in the way I want. I have these pieces, which I've cut like double plus the width of the other like items like this, like my bias tape and my waistband. I'm going to just sew them. Well, I'm gonna put an interfacing, but then I'm gonna just sew them like this and put the little points on the ends. And then I will check back in when I get ready to start painting my face for the black and white makeup. And now I'm getting started on my makeup. I already tested my method on my legs to get things pretty streak free, as well as like built up and set so they don't transfer onto things. So here I am just painting my face. Basically, I just took the paint that I bought from Amazon and I was just applying it with a cheap foundation brush from e.l.f. And then I followed kind of a tutorial from another YouTuber that I will link down below. I found her tutorial the most simple and helpful because I wasn't going to do all these complicated colors. I did ignore doing multiple shades to kind of contour your shape of your face. I just wasn't interested in doing that. I just wanted to basically look like I was in black and white. I didn't feel like I needed to all of a sudden look contoured since that's not something I really do in real life. So I just did a little bit of cheek contouring, but that's it. But this was super fun and very challenging. And it was a fun new skill for me to learn. There's Toto. That was so weird. She was so squiggly. She's so mad. Anyway, this here is the full costume. I did the makeup. It's kind of streaky and maybe not the best, but I think it has accomplished the effect I want. You can see I haven't gone outside in the rain yet with it, so we're gonna see how that goes. But I am gonna do some, I wanted to do some conclusion. My friends helped me with the wig. The wig I can take zero credit for, except for buying it. I read a lot of Amazon reviews. The gloves are just because I need hands. I know Dorothy's not wearing gloves in the movie, but I need to be able to touch things, and my hands sweat, and the second you sweat, this makeup comes off. So not a good option for me. And then yeah, Spooky was Toto. And yeah, I'm pretty pleased with the result of this makeup. It's definitely like 1,000 times creepier than I thought it would be, which is why for the actual like talking about the construction of the dress and how I felt about that, we're gonna go back into like normal looking Haylee that is not quite this creepy, because this is spookier than I thought it would be. But happy spooky season. But yes, now we'll flip over to normal Haylee so you don't have to look at this really creepy face the whole time I talk. So we are at the end of this process. I'm wearing black and have my hair styled like Dorothy in honor of this costume. Let's just talk about how everything went. This is the shirt. I still think it's super cute. I will say I got some gray paint, taking it on and off with the gray paint on my body. And so I wish, I will for sure, if I make this pattern again, make the cuffs wider, because currently they are not wide enough, even though I measured and I added a whole inch to my like arms to try to get them like loose enough so they're comfy. They are not particularly loose or comfy, but otherwise I'm really happy with this blouse. I really like the way it fits, especially with a jumper, and it has French seams. So this whole project was a trial on French seams, and I actually think they turned out really, really successful, and I'm pretty excited about that because I think they're a really great tool to have in my toolbox as far as seam finishes. I definitely am not all of a sudden going to start doing everything in French seams, but stuff that is sheer or stuff that the fabric is really, really light or phrase easy, this will be definitely a tool to have in my kit. And then I also learned how to like kind of put rickrack or like trim in a seam. I won't say I did like the best job ever with this. However, I am still pretty happy with it and think it's super cute. But that's it about the top. The top was pretty easy. The jumper, on the other hand, was not. I am really, really proud of this. It is by no means perfect, but it is my first time making not a pattern myself, because I just cut this and like went loosey-goosey, but like it's my first time making something without a pattern. So I did make obviously the bodice with a pattern, but then I modified it, and I also made the skirt without a pattern and did all of the like piping and work without a pattern, and I think it all turned out really well. Looking at a picture of Dorothy's costume again now, I would say I should have made the straps wider. I actually had cut them wider, and then later when I was sewing, I was like, why is this wider than everything else? And I cut off like an inch of fabric, and that would have made it just wide enough to match better with the costume. The other thing that's different is the buttons aren't accurate. I put on these really cute black rimmed white buttons just because, again, while it's really cool to make a really cool Halloween costume, I wanted to make something that's going to stick in my wardrobe. And so I wanted to make this, which is going to be in my wardrobe forever and ever and ever. It looks really cute with stuff, and I will be able to layer sweaters under it and turtlenecks under it, and so it'll be a nice winter dress, and then I can actually also just wear it in the summer. So I think that's actually pretty cool and a huge win, because Halloween costumes are incredibly wasteful. I would like to ask everybody to think really intentional about what they do for Halloween and make sure it's something they'll keep for a while, just because even though they are fairly cheap, costumes will, those polyester costumes will be on this earth for hundreds and hundreds of years after we die. So just please think about your costume and try to make do with what you have already, or if you do buy something that will last a really, really long time. One more thing kind of about this dress, I'm also really proud of the seam work in it. I took the time to bias tape the messy gathered edge up here, and then I also used French seams on this guy. So this one is super easy to throw in the wash, and so is the shirt, and I think that's really exciting. The last thing to talk about was kind of the wig and the face paint. So my wig I can take zero credit for. My friend Katie and Jess, they both helped me a ton. Katie got the wig on my head in a way that stayed really well. They kept poking pins in, and they're like, does it feel sturdy enough? And I'm like, for walking around a garden, yes. And they're like, well, I always think of wigs as something you dance in. And so my wig was dance proof. And then Jess went ahead and styled it into the braids, so I can take zero credit for the wig. I will, however, link the wig down below in case you're interested in it. It was really nice quality for the price. So I super liked it, and I plan on keeping it and using it for other things. I don't know what yet, but I will be using it for other things. As for the face and body paint, I'm pretty proud of it. It worked really well. The biggest bummer was not checking what the weather was going to be before I painted my whole body and finding out that it was going to pour rain all day afterwards, because while I did a great job in my opinion on the makeup, it is not waterproof makeup. I was not looking for anything that was waterproof or sweatproof. It just had to be enough to take some video footage in and maybe go to a party in at some point. I think I'm going to redo it and go to a party. But I'm pretty pleased with it. I did try to put in like the shadows on my face, and it kept turning out really poorly, and I kept having to put more makeup on. So I feel like the makeup on my face ended up super crusty. I will like put in a picture here, and I will also put in a picture of how like weird it looked after my makeup had been in the rain. It was super weird and patchy looking and very creepy. That is it for this project. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This was, I think, one of my favorite things I've ever made. Not probably the like most well-made thing I've ever made, but definitely my favorite. If you enjoyed this project, I have a bunch of sewing projects planned, including one more spooky season project, and then we'll move into normal fall and winter sewing projects, but definitely subscribe and stay tuned for that if you haven't already, and I will see you next time. Bye!